This past Saturday, Americans watched in horror as a would-be assassin fired several gunshots at presidential candidate and former president Donald Trump. Let's talk about it. Stay tuned. Well, welcome back to another week of Explain, another week where we engage the culture from a biblical perspective in a manner which glorifies God. And man, this past week has been quite a week. I feel like I've been saying this every week, but this past Saturday in Pennsylvania, we all have seen the news coverage and all that stuff on it by now. There was an assassination attempt on the life of Donald Trump. An assassin somehow got through security clearances, got through everything, apparently, and we can never trust what people are telling us now, right? But apparently got through unnoticed, got to the top of a roof unnoticed that the Secret Service director claims the Secret Service did not cover because the slope was too steep. That's just ridiculous. But anyway, got up on the roof, and apparently people didn't notice, or no one who could have done anything about it really noticed. And this assassin was allowed to, or able to, fire a couple of shots at Donald Trump, which mostly missed him, but one of the bullets grazed his ear and gave him basically just like a flesh wound, you could say, right? And the whole thing has produced so many different storylines, right? Everybody's all worked up now. Of course, you have that iconic photo of Trump as they were, because of course, when something of this gravity happens, when something of this nature happens, you have the Secret Service there, and they once the gunshots actually went off, the Secret Service went and surrounded him, but there was somebody in the crowd who took this very iconic looking picture, and from his angle, the Secret Service person who was covering Trump from that angle was a very short lady. Man, that's a whole other can of worms. Why are women now protecting men, right? But anyway, I don't even know if we're gonna have time to get into that today. But there you go. I've just submitted my disapproval of that, right? Anyway, you have this very short lady on one side of Trump, kind of the side that was facing the crowd. And so Trump, you're able to see his shoulders and kind of his head, and, with the blood kind of running down his face from his ear. And he just he just gives this big fist pump, right? And that's a very iconic picture now that we have. And I've heard people say, yeah, your grandkids are going to look in the, in the history books, and that picture's going to be there, quite a crazy event. And it's one of those things, a lot of people are saying that this is one of those things that it's like, you're going to remember where you were when you heard the news about this. You're going to remember the kind of the context around it. So anyway, there's all that to say that there are plenty of different things that are floating around. One of the things that people are noticing is God's divine hand in it all. God's divine hand in it all. And you have just this verse that keeps coming up over and over and over again. Is actually these two verses from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 through 2. It says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted." So we clearly understand that there is a time appointed for each and every person to die, and the only explanation as to why these things happened, right? As to why the bullet was shot and Trump turned his head at the last second. The only explanation as to why things happened the way they did and Trump is still alive is that it wasn't his time. It wasn't his time yet. And so that's important. It is important to remember God's sovereignty in all of this. And that's really something that I want to drill into here. And just take a minute and take a step back and look at God's hand in it all, because you can clearly see him working in all of this. And I'd like to even I'd like to point you to this this post here. This post here by Wade Stotts. He's quoting this guy, Nick Carter. I do believe that Trump was protected by God and his survival was divine providence. Agreed. I don't know who Nick Carter is. Should I? I don't know. But there you go. But Wade Stotts says it's true. Every other time Trump escapes some nasty plan from the left, it could always be chalked up to either his personal skill or the ineptitude of his enemies. Saturday was one example that can only be attributed to a kind providence. And then Stotts makes the argument, and Trump knows it. And then you can see that shot there down below. That basically kind of shows exactly how close the bullet passed to the side of Trump's head. There's actually this video circulating online that kind of almost looks a little bit like this shot, but it shows you where Trump's head was just a couple seconds before, and then he turns his head at the last second. And so, yeah, and Stotts says Trump knows it. Obviously, people will debate that, but it is interesting how in a lot of his interviews he says, that he's had since this happened. He said things like, a lot of people say that it's God that saved me, that saved my life. And I think he's speaking in a physical sense, right? Not in a spiritual sense. But he is aware at least of that, or he's claiming to be aware of that, which is a good thing. That's a good thing that he recognizes that. And one other thing that's interesting, just that we can take away as just kind of an application from this whole thing, and even an application from that Ecclesiastes passage that we read a few minutes ago, is just this idea that you need to know that you're going to die. You need to know that you're going to die. So yes, this wasn't Trump's time, but a near pass with death for any of us who have had a near-death experience, it does make you think about, okay, well, one of these days, it's not going to be a near-death experience. It is going to be a death experience. And the question becomes, what are you going to do on that day? What are you going to have to stand on that day? Are you going to be one who goes to the grave resting in peace, knowing that Christ died for your sins? And I'm not talking about, a lot of people say R.I.P., rest in peace, on people's graves, right? I want to be careful how I say this. But that's just sentimentality, and it's not true. If a person is not saved, you can only say that a person rests in peace if they know the Lord. Otherwise, they are not resting in peace. And fellow Christians, we should know this. We should know this. We know that the Bible teaches that there are two places, heaven and hell, and that people who don't know Christ go to hell, and that is not a restful place, okay? And so the question then becomes, that day when you don't have a near miss with death, when you have a death experience, not a near-death experience, what are you going to have to stand on? And I love Steve Lawson, actually, he preached at John MacArthur's church on Sunday, so the day after everything happened, and he was, of course, kind of reflecting on these things. He was reflecting on the events of Saturday night and just kind of pointing the church in the right direction as to how to process this whole thing. And it's an excellent sermon. I would commend it to you. I think I might actually try to put it in the description of this video so that you can watch Lawson's sermon after you're done watching this video. But Lawson said, basically, he said each day, he made the point that each day has greater escalating value because you get closer to death every day. So each day, as you get closer to the time, which you don't know when it is, but each day gets you closer to the time that God has appointed for you to die. And so each day should be treated with escalating value. Okay, what am I going to do today? Because today is more important because it's closer to my death than the last day, okay, than yesterday. And I thought that was an excellent point that Lawson made. And of course, this whole debate, as people like to debate, people like to debate online all the time, I guess. The whole debate, and this the title of this video, right? And I've kind of been talking a little bit about it already, but I haven't directly answered the question yet. The question everybody wants to know is, did God move the bullet? Did God move the bullet? And just to give you a little bit of context for what's going on here, I guess people have been going on and on about this. They've been going back and forth regarding these things. So Scott Aniol says this: the claim God moved the bullet is more of a mythological view of God than a biblical view. God didn't have to move the bullet as if the shot were somehow independent of him. He ordained the trajectory before the foundation of the world. And I think what Scott is getting at there is just he's trying to get people to guard against the idea that it's like all of a sudden the gun goes off and God says, oh no, what am I going to do? I never saw this coming. I guess I'm just going to move the bullet, move it over a little bit, just kind of blow in the wind, and there it goes off to the side of Trump's head. Scott is trying to guard against that kind of view as if God is some kind of reactionary God. You know what I mean? That's what he's trying to guard against. So it depends on what you mean by did God move the bullet? Okay. So let's keep going because there's some interesting stuff that goes on. So this guy Taylor Eaton, who I don't know who he is, says, "Can't this be a both and? Can't this be a both and?" Because you have a lot of people saying God moved the bullet. And see, so what Scott Aniol is guarding against is the idea, like I said, that God is some kind of reactionary God. Okay. And then there's these guys on the other side, and I don't even want to pit them against each other because, like this guy says, it is a both and, right? It is a both and. And we're going to look at Scott's response to that, where he basically says that it is a both and, right? But you have these other guys who want to emphasize God's divine providence in that situation, the fact that we saw God's hand at work, okay? And that's why they say God moved the bullet, because to a normal person like you and me, just a normal thinking blue collar person who works a 9-to-5 type of thing, right? As a normal person like that, someone who's not thinking in like sophisticated terms, someone who doesn't have their theological hat on right now. Like right now, I'm trying to put on my theological hat, right? But if you're thinking just normally, right? If you're just like, at work and you say, hey, yeah, God moved the bullet, you could mean a lot of different things by that, right? And so there are guys on this side who are saying, yes, God moved the bullet. And they're trying to emphasize the fact that God worked in such a way that could be looked upon as supernatural, right? Maybe, so there are some people who are saying that, it's kind of like a miracle that this happened, right? And I want to get to Scott's response to this guy who says, can't this be a both and? He says, yes, absolutely. That's true of all miracles. God ordained what would happen in eternity past and within time, this is key, altered the normal course of things. But most of how God works is providentially, not miraculously, okay? So that's important. Again, I'm trying to put on my theologian hat here, and Scott's absolutely right in what he's saying. He is absolutely right in what he's saying, that God is working providentially, but he's altering the way that things normally would go in time, right? Like normally, in a normal situation, you could argue that Trump would have kept his head pointed in the same direction rather than moving it 2 seconds before the shot went off, or before the bullet passed his head. You could argue that normally Trump would be pointed in that same direction. He would be facing that same direction. You could argue, I think there was a little bit of a wind, right? Someone had said maybe there was a little bit of wind. So you could argue again that the fact that there was wind, that's not that, and even the amount of wind that maybe the shooter didn't account for. All those things, it's God working in that moment, right? But then we also have to, like Scott is saying, we have to step out of the picture and say, yes, God is intimately involved in things. He is intimately involved in every single little detail. And then you zoom back out and you say, yes, but God also knows all these things are going to happen before they happen. And not only that, but he providentially predestined these things to happen. And we have to say that. Okay? And it's interesting just to kind of support what we're trying to get at here. Proverbs 16 verse 33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So a lot, just so everybody's on the same page here, is like a chance drawing, right? It's like they would it would be something that they would look at as by chance, right? Like for us, like we flip a coin, right? It's supposed to be an even chance, but we know that God knows what side the coin's going to land on. Or roll of a dice. God knows where the dice are going to land, what numbers the dice are going to land on, right? And so that's what's being addressed there. But there has been a big conversation about this. Like really, the question becomes, how do we reconcile God's providence, predestining things to happen, right? Knowing that things are going to happen before they happen. And then also, how do we communicate to people that God is intimately involved in the details of things, right? And I mean, you have this piece here by William Wolfe, which I do want to, I'm going to also link this post here that you're seeing in the description, but this kind of encapsulates what's going on, the different conversations that people are having about this. So yeah, I would commend that to you. And of course, there you get that, that's the iconic picture that everybody's looking at, the Trump, the fist bump by Trump. But yeah, so the question then becomes, did God move the bullet, right? Everybody's asking, did God move the bullet? Well, I would say, depending on what you mean by that, yes. Depending on what you mean by that, yes. If you're telling me that when you say God moved the bullet, if you're just trying to communicate to me that God did something miraculous, that God did something that was not, that wouldn't normally, naturally happen in that situation, then yes, I would say yes. But then I'm also going to say that God also predestined this stuff to happen. None of this was a surprise to God. Okay? So I think it is a both and. We have to balance these two things. We have to hold these things in tension. All right? And then that's without even getting into the other thing that a lot of people come back and say. And I want to point you to this post here. So you may recognize that first post we already looked at by Scott Aniol. But then you have this this post here by the Provisionist Perspective. We've talked at length about provisionism and why I don't agree with it. I'm not going to get into that right now. But they're taking issue with what Scott says. Okay, now do the bullet that took the life of the firefighter who died protecting his wife and daughter. This is such garbage, blasphemous theology. Now, before I address this, I just want to point something out to you. I want to know something. Why does it seem like every time there are tragedies, right? There's these tragic events. Many provisionist apologists are right there, standing right there, ready to make you and your tragedy into a theological point. Please explain that to me. Because that is one of the most unchristian things you could possibly do. Okay? Rather than weep with those who weep, rather than mourn with those who mourn, rather than show Christian love and concern for a person, you're going to stand there and make them into a theological point? Shameful. absolutely shameful and completely unchristian. Okay? So let that be said. Let that be said. I have a problem with a lot of provisionist apologists because of that. I saw them do this to Phil Johnson. Phil Johnson, had some health issues, and he said he was going to be praying about that. And then the provisionist apologist came in and said, why do you need to pray if you believe that God's sovereignly predestining everything? Man, that's not the time. It's not the time. You got to know what time it is. Okay, that's completely insensitive and completely unchristian. All right, so yeah, I'm off my soapbox now. Okay, let's address let's address the man who was shot. The man who was shot, because the bullet grazed past Trump's ear and shot or hit Corey Comportori. And man, let me just say, my heart aches for his family, for his wife and his daughter who were there. Let me just say that Corey died a hero's death. His daughter's recollection of it, man, is if you got the strength to read it, it's heartbreaking, but it's worth reading. She basically said that her dad shielded her and her mom from the gunfire, and he took the hit. And he laid down his life for his family, and that is a real life hero. That is a real life hero. And the first thing that we have to say about this is, rather than being the people who stand there and make a theological point out of someone's tragedy, we have to be people as Christians who follow what Romans 12 tells us to do. Let me put it up on the screen for you. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Corey's family right now is hurting. They're weeping. So what we as Christians need to do is weep with them. Mourn with them. Because, they've lost their father, husband, right? It's a tragic situation. And this is why we can say there is evil in the world. People who think that the world is just a cakewalk, you're wrong. You're wrong. And Saturday shows us that there is evil in the world. Okay? And I could spend a whole other podcast trying to figure out who put this assassin up to this, or the lapse in competency seemingly of the Secret Service. There's plenty more to say about that, and I'm sure we'll get more details coming out, and I'll wait until those details come out to talk about that. But it is ironic to me that Trump has been the focus of so much scrutiny and criticism, and then they try to indict him, and then they try to impeach him, and then now there's this assassination attempt, and who knows where it came from. And I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that for now. We'll wait until information comes out to talk more about that. But needless to say, I'm having a hard time believing that a 20-year-old kid acted alone. All right. I don't know if he acted. He could have been acting with his pal that also was not associated with anybody. But we'll see. Okay. But this shows you that there's evil in the world. Okay. The world is a place where fallen sinners reside. And we saw that because a man was killed. A man was murdered on Saturday, right out in the open in front of everybody. Tragic. And I want to say a couple of things about that. Each person, like I said this at the beginning, there is a time, a day, an hour for each person. And I think that we can actually find comfort in the fact that God knows each and everything that's going to happen. And also, he knows, not only does he know as far as in a data type of sense, right? Like where he knows what's going to happen woodenly, but also he understands the pain that we go through in this world. He gets it. He does. He understands that pain because Christ came down to this earth and took on flesh, and he suffered. So he knows our pain and he knows our suffering. Okay, so let that be said. And also, people don't tend to have a problem with the idea that everybody has a time that's their time. All right. Until they see something like this play out, right? And that tests your faith in that concept, in that truth that everybody has a time, that God has ordained for every single person a time. But just because of what we're seeing in front of us, just because of this tragic thing that we're seeing in front of us, that doesn't alter the truth that there is a time for each and every person. And you know what? I think the best way to say it is the way that Graham Gundin over at Founders Ministries said. Their podcasts have been excellent recently. I would commend them to you. But Graham Gundin basically said, Comparatori died a hero's death, and everyone's going to die. Are you going to die well? And you know what? When all is said and done, and we're looking back on this, when history looks back on this 50, 100 years from now, and everybody else at that rally is also dead, they're going to look at Corey among all those other people and say, that guy died a hero's death. He died well. He died well. And that's something that I think that we can take comfort in, right? Is that history, when you look back, right? When we look back at this in history, we'll see that this guy was the guy that died honorably. And Graham Gundin basically just made the point, I hope I die like that. I hope I die well. I hope I die a hero. And I think that was just a great point, right? A great point. So let that be said. I know that is a difficult part of this whole thing, right? Because people say, oh yeah, well, if God moved the bullet, then why didn't he move the bullet away from this guy too, right? Well, the way that we can answer that is that guy died a hero's death, and we can look back on this. We'll look back on this in 50 to 100 years when everybody else there is also dead and say that guy out of all of them is the guy that we remember, right? And we remember him because of his heroic actions. So did God move the bullet? Yes, depending on what you mean by that. All right. So I hope that I just kind of I think this is just a good way when we talk about these things to debrief from what we're seeing around us. Is go to the scriptures, go to what the Word of God has to say. We know that God is sovereign. We know how we're to act as Christians in tragic situations. So let the Word of God be our guide. All right. I hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time.